It started as a casual moment, but what happened next was nothing short of intense. The kind of intensity that left me questioning everything about myself. I never thought something so unexpected could change my life in an instant. The pain, the overwhelming sensation. It was so much that I couldn't even walk for days. What could have happened to me? You won't believe the shocking truth. Stay with me until the end because this story is going to leave you speechless. I never saw it coming. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day. I had been working hard for weeks, trying to stay focused, dealing with all the usual stresses of life. But that day, something was different. I was walking home from work, the usual routine, my mind wandering from one thought to another. It wasn't until I bumped into him that everything changed. It was one of those moments that felt surreal. I wasn't expecting it, and neither was he. He was someone I had met a while ago, but we hadn't spoken much. He was familiar, but not a part of my daily life. Yet, when our eyes locked, there was an undeniable pull. Something unspoken passed between us. An electric current that left both of us silent for a moment. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, but there was this undeniable tension. The kind of tension that makes you feel like time slows down, where every second feels amplified. Before I could walk away, he smiled, a soft, confident smile, and suggested we grab a coffee. There was something about his presence that made me feel like I couldn't say no, even though everything in me screamed to just keep walking. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, or maybe it was the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. It wasn't something I experienced often, but I could feel the shift in my thoughts, my body reacting to the closeness between us. We walked to a nearby cafe, and the moment we sat down, the conversation shifted to a deeper level. He asked questions that made me think about life, about my goals, about the things I had never told anyone. It felt intimate, not because of the words we were exchanging, but because of the way he listened. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years, telling him things that I usually kept hidden away. His gaze never wavered, and I felt understood in a way I hadn't realized I needed. But it wasn't just the conversation that felt different. There was something in the air. The chemistry. I could feel it building with every word, every glance, every subtle movement. It was magnetic, undeniable. But at the same time, there was a sense of danger, an undercurrent of something I wasn't sure I should be exploring. The more I resisted, the more I wanted to give in. And then, as if on cue, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine in a simple touch that sent a shock straight through me. I froze, unsure of what to do. My heart raced as I looked at him, my body betraying the thoughts in my head. It was so unexpected, so intense, that I didn't know how to react. For a moment, we both just stayed there, locked in this unspoken understanding. It felt like the world outside had faded away. Nothing else mattered but the sensation coursing through my veins, making my skin tingle, my thoughts clouded. I shouldn't be doing this, I whispered, but my voice felt distant, as if I wasn't even sure I meant it. But he didn't pull away. Instead, his gaze softened, and he leaned in just a bit closer, his breath warm against my skin. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," he said softly. "But you feel it too, don't you?" My pulse quickened as I nodded, unable to speak. I could feel it. I could feel the desire, the pull between us. It was intoxicating, the kind of chemistry that felt dangerous but also irresistible. And in that moment, I made the decision to stay, to let it happen, to see where this intense connection would lead. But little did I know, that simple decision would change everything. What followed that night would be so intense that it left me unable to walk for days. The night started innocently enough. We left the cafe and walked through the quiet streets, our steps in sync as we talked. The conversation, once light and easy, had shifted to something more personal, more intimate. His voice had a certain charm to it, smooth and low, and I found myself hanging on every word. It wasn't just his words, it was his presence, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. We stopped at a park near the edge of the city, the night air cool against our skin. The soft glow of the street lamps cast long shadows, and I could see the way his eyes lingered on me, as if he were trying to read me, to understand what I was thinking. I didn't know what I was thinking. I was caught between the pull of my own curiosity and the rational side of my brain screaming that this wasn't something I should be doing. We sat on a bench, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged. Every movement, every breath felt amplified. I could feel the electricity in the air, and despite the questions swirling in my mind, I couldn't bring myself to move. I couldn't bring myself to stop this moment. "You're different," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't seem like everyone else. There's something about you that's magnetic." I couldn't explain it, but I felt it too. The magnetic pull, the unspoken attraction that was growing stronger by the second. But what did it mean? Was this just chemistry, or was there something deeper? And why was I letting it happen? I had always prided myself on being in control, but in that moment, I felt like I was losing myself, losing control. Before I could gather my thoughts, he was closer, his hand reaching for mine once again. The moment his skin touched mine, I felt my body respond in ways I hadn't expected. The warmth, the pressure, it sent a wave of heat through me. I looked at him, my heart racing in my chest, and for a split second, I wondered if I should pull away. But I didn't. I let him hold my hand, let him draw me in even closer. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. There was a hint of something, uncertainty, but also a deep desire. I couldn't answer. The words were caught in my throat, tangled in the web of emotions I was feeling. What did I want? What did I need in this moment? The attraction was undeniable, the desire growing with every second. But was it worth it? Was it worth risking everything I had, everything I knew? He moved closer, his lips hovering just inches from mine. The air between us crackled with tension, and I could feel the urge to close the distance, to give in to the overwhelming desire. But something inside me held back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the consequences of what this could mean. But before I could think about it any longer, he kissed me. It wasn't a soft, gentle kiss. It was intense, demanding, as though he couldn't wait any longer. The passion in that kiss was overwhelming, and for a moment, I lost myself completely in it. All the doubts, all the questions, vanished. There was nothing but the sensation, the need, the heat between us. When he finally pulled away, I was breathless, my head spinning. His hand was still holding mine, his thumb rubbing small circles on my skin as we both caught our breath. The kiss had left me reeling, but it also made me want more. I felt intoxicated by him, by the chemistry that had ignited between us, and I knew that I couldn't walk away from it now. But the intensity of that kiss, the force of everything that came after it, left me feeling completely overwhelmed. It wasn't just the physical impact, it was emotional, too. The connection between us was so powerful that it left me breathless, unable to fully process what had just happened. And as the night went on, I found myself unable to think clearly. Everything felt fuzzy, like I was caught in a whirlwind that I couldn't escape from. The next morning, I woke up with a headache, my body sore in places I didn't expect. The intensity of the night before hadn't just left an emotional mark, it had left a physical one too. I tried to move, but my body felt stiff, and it took everything in me to even get out of bed. I couldn't remember the last time I felt this way, both mentally and physically exhausted. I had no idea that one single moment, one intense experience, would leave me feeling this, wrecked. And it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that weighed on me, it was the emotional aftermath, the questions that kept swirling in my mind. What did this mean? What was I supposed to do now? The next few days were a blur. I barely had time to process what had happened. Every time I tried to focus on something, my mind would wander back to that night, to him, to the way I felt in his arms. The intensity of everything had left me feeling disoriented, almost like I was walking through life in a fog. My body ached, but it wasn't just the physical pain that bothered me. It was the emotional weight. It was like I had been hit by a storm, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. At first, I didn't know how to face him. The chemistry between us was undeniable, but was it enough? Was it something worth pursuing? My mind was filled with doubt, questions I couldn't answer. Was this just a fleeting moment, or was there something more? I had let myself get swept away in the intensity of it all, but now I had to deal with the consequences. The pain in my body persisted. It wasn't just soreness. It felt like my muscles had been stretched, overused, and I couldn't figure out why. I hadn't been physically active enough to warrant this kind of discomfort, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the intensity of our connection had left a mark on me, one that went beyond the physical. It wasn't just the emotional connection that had drained me, it was everything. I had given myself over completely, allowing everything to take over without thinking about the aftermath. I tried to push through it, tried to carry on with my daily routine, but it was impossible. I couldn't walk properly without wincing in pain. Every time I moved, I was reminded of what had happened, of how intense it had been. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had let something consume me, something that left me physically incapacitated, mentally exhausted, and emotionally drained. I decided to reach out to him. It was the only thing I could do. I couldn't ignore the pull between us, but I also couldn't let the experience control me. I needed to regain some sense of control over my own life. I needed to talk to him, to figure out what this all meant. Did he feel the same way? Or had it just been a passing moment for him? Something that didn't carry the weight it did for me? We met in a quiet cafe. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to get out of the conversation. Part of me wanted answers, while another part of me just wanted to understand what was happening to me. Why had I felt so overwhelmed, so drained? It wasn't just physical. It was as if my entire being had been touched by something so intense that it had left me broken, vulnerable. "Hey," he said when I sat down. His eyes were soft, his voice calm. But there was something there, something unspoken, that felt like a thread pulling between us. I didn't waste any time. "What happened?" I asked, my voice more vulnerable than I intended. Why did everything feel so intense? I couldn't even walk for days. This isn't normal. Was it just me, or was it you too? He paused for a moment, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to figure out what I was really asking. "I don't know," he said slowly, his voice laced with uncertainty. "I've never felt anything like that before. I couldn't explain it, but when we were together, everything just seemed to click. And then afterward, I don't know, I just felt like something had shifted. Something had changed. But I didn't expect you to feel like this." I took a deep breath. "It was overwhelming," I said. "I've never had something take over me like that. I didn't know if it was real or just temporary, but it left me incapacitated. Not just physically, but emotionally too." He leaned back, looking at me with a mixture of concern and understanding. "I didn't want that to happen," he said quietly. "I never meant to make you feel this way. I guess I got caught up in the moment too, but it was intense for me too." more than I expected. The weight of his words sank in, and for the first time since that night, I felt a little bit lighter. He understood. He wasn't just a bystander in my experience. He had felt it too. It wasn't just me overreacting or misinterpreting things. We had both been consumed by the intensity of the moment. But understanding didn't make the aftermath any easier. I still felt physically drained, mentally exhausted. I still had questions that couldn't be answered by just talking to him. What did this mean for me moving forward? Was it worth it to continue, or was I just trying to hold on to something that was never meant to last? I didn't have the answers, but at least now I knew that it wasn't just me. He had felt the same intensity. We had both been changed by it. The days that followed felt like I was living in a haze. The intensity of that one night had left its mark in ways I didn't know how to handle. I couldn't walk for days. Yes, but it was more than that. My mind was clouded with confusion, trying to figure out what this meant for me, for him, and for the life I was trying to return to. How could I simply go back to my normal routine after feeling something so powerful? How could I forget what I had experienced with him? I couldn't. There were moments when I felt like I was losing myself, when I would catch a glimpse of his smile or the way he looked at me in my mind, and my body would react against my will. I couldn't deny that there was something magnetic about him, something I hadn't experienced in years. But with that magnetism came the fear of what it would cost me. Would I be okay if I let it consume me again? Or would I be left even more broken than before? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was standing at a crossroads in my life. Do I let this one-night encounter with him become something more? Do I allow myself to fall deeper into the intensity, knowing the consequences of that choice? I needed time. Time to clear my head, time to decide whether or not this overwhelming attraction was worth it. My mind was telling me to run, but my heart was telling me to hold on just a little longer. It was a dangerous game I was playing, one that could either lift me to new heights or leave me shattered in the process. As I walked through my usual routines, work, errands, spending time with friends, there was this constant tug at my soul. It was as if I couldn't escape the grip he had on me. It wasn't just physical attraction anymore. It was emotional. There was a piece of me that didn't want to let go of the connection we shared, even if it was brief, even if it was intense. But what was the cost of holding on to that connection? I felt trapped. Trapped by my own feelings, by the intensity of the night that had shifted something deep within me. Could I go back to being the person I was before? Or had I crossed a line from which there was no return? I decided to reach out to him again. I couldn't let it linger without closure, without understanding what was happening between us. So we agreed to meet once more, to talk. It wasn't about rekindling what we had. It was about finding the answers to the questions that had been haunting me since that night. This time, we met at a quiet park. The trees swayed in the soft breeze, the air cool but welcoming. We sat on a bench, far from the noise of the city. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew that it was time to face whatever had been brewing between us. "You look different," he said as we sat down. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of uncertainty to it, as if he wasn't sure what to say next. "You seem distant." "I've been thinking," I replied, my voice quiet. "Thinking about what happened and what it means. I can't stop thinking about you." He nodded, his eyes searching mine. "I get it. It was intense, more than I expected. I just didn't want you to feel pressured into something you weren't ready for. But I can't pretend it didn't affect me too." For a moment, we were silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The intensity of what we had shared was still there, lingering between us. But now it wasn't just the physical attraction that consumed me, it was the emotional weight of it. the way it had changed me. It had opened up a part of me I hadn't even known existed, and I didn't know how to close it again. "I don't know what I want right now," I finally said, my voice shaky. "I feel like everything has shifted, and I don't know how to go back to the way things were." "I don't want you to go back," he said quietly. "I don't think we can go back to what we were before. What we shared changed everything. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward, whatever that looks like." It was at that moment that I realized something. I didn't have to make a decision right then and there. I didn't have to know everything. I just needed time. Time to process what had happened, time to figure out what I wanted, and time to understand who I was now that everything had changed. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't about rushing into something or making a choice right away. It was about giving myself the space I needed to heal, to decide whether or not I wanted to explore the intensity of what we had or move on entirely. The following days were quieter. I gave myself the space I had needed. No more impulsive decisions, no more letting emotions guide me. I spent time with myself, reflecting on the chaos, the passion, and the exhaustion that had followed that intense night. There was something cathartic about taking a step back, even if the emotions still swirled inside me, like an ever-present storm. I kept thinking about our conversation in the park. His words echoed in my mind. "I don't think we can go back to what we were before. What we shared changed everything." And it hit me. He was right. There was no way to erase what had happened, no way to simply pretend it never occurred. The experience had marked us both. It wasn't just a physical thing, it was deeper. It had altered something inside of me. The intensity had unlocked a side of me I didn't even know existed, and I couldn't ignore it. But with that realization came another one. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I had walked into this situation thinking I could keep everything in control, but the intensity of what had transpired had shattered that illusion. I was no longer the person who could compartmentalize everything neatly. I was changed, more raw, more vulnerable than I had ever been. And while that scared me, it also made me realize something important. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I wasn't sure what the future would hold. Maybe I would explore this intense connection further, or maybe it would be a fleeting moment in time that I would eventually let go of. But the truth was, I couldn't force myself to move forward without giving myself the time to heal from what had happened. I needed to process, to accept the experience, and to come to terms with it. As the days passed, I found myself reconnecting with the things that once brought me peace. I started picking up old hobbies, like painting and reading, things I had abandoned in the whirlwind of my previous life. I started to feel like myself again. Slowly, I began to rebuild, piece by piece. I kept thinking about him too. There was no denying the impact he had on me, the way he had made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. But the question still lingered. Was this something worth pursuing? Or was it just a moment of intensity that would fade with time? Eventually, I reached out to him again, but this time it wasn't about rushing back into anything. It was about understanding. It was about asking the questions I hadn't been able to ask before, about what we both wanted, about what had really happened. I wanted to clear the air, to know where we stood, even if that meant accepting that our connection might have been temporary. We met at the same cafe where it all began. The atmosphere was different this time. The tension wasn't as thick, the uncertainty not as overpowering. We sat across from each other, both of us aware of what we had shared, but no longer weighed down by the intensity of it. "I've had time to think," I said, looking at him. "And I've come to realize that whatever this was, it can't define me. I can't let it take over my life." He nodded, his eyes steady. "I understand. I felt the same way. It was intense, but I know it can't be the foundation of anything real." We can't just keep living in that moment. And in that moment, I understood something profound. This wasn't just about him or about us. It was about me, about reclaiming my power. It was about moving on from the past and embracing the future, whatever it might hold. I had given myself to that intensity, but now I was reclaiming control. I think I'm ready to move on, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. I don't need to hold on to this anymore. He smiled gently, the same understanding in his eyes. I'm glad to hear that. I think we both needed to let go of the weight of it. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in days. The physical pain had faded, and the emotional weight was slowly lifting. I had made the choice to let go, not of the experience, but of the need to make it something more. It was time to move forward, to let go of the intensity that had once consumed me. The future was mine to create, and I was finally ready to step into it with a clear mind and an open heart.